You found part 2 of the Dreamcatcher tutorial. I'm drying off the paint that we've already done with the blow dryer, and then we're going to get started on the next row. I'll be using the larger blue tool with the white paint, and that is going to give us the start of our next row of petals. I'm going to do this a little bit differently in walking the dots. First, I'm going to do a lighter shade of brown for the first dot, and then I'm going to walk some white dots around that. And then put 2 little white dots in the space right where the petal begins. And then I'm going to do a little larger dot of the same light brown to start the next row, and put 2 small brown dots next to that, and then I'll use the white to walk the row the rest of the way. And then I'm going to use my darker shade of brown to start my next row with 2 small dots next to it, and then I'll be walking down with the white. This is just a different technique in making petals to make it look a little bit different from the other petals that we're walking in this design. Makes it look a little bit more like a feather. Now I'm using my white to go around the circle that I have traced, and it's going to end up being behind the blue petals of the original design in the center. I wanted it to have a little bit of a 3D effect. Now I'm walking the light brown around that, making sure I've got enough space for 2 more in there. And then I'll be doing a medium shade of brown, and you'll notice I'm lining these up. I'm not offsetting them. And one of my dots didn't have enough paint in it, so I'm going back with a second load of paint to make sure that I have a nice little mound in the center of that dot. I want them to all be the same. So I'm lining those up, and then in between that row, I'm putting a light turquoise dot. And then the next row is also going to be in line. I'm not offsetting these. And that's in my darker shade of brown. Kind of a red brown on this. I think that's the burnt sienna. Being careful to line those dots up. And then my final shade of brown, this darker coffee bean brown. I'm using a little bit larger tool for this one, and then I'm going to be putting a light cream shade in between that row. I actually added a little bit of iridescent gold to this so it would be a little more shiny when it dried, and then I'm going to walk 3 dots in between each of those rows in that space. And try and keep these as straight as you can, and do that all the way around, and it just creates a wonderful effect. Now I'm using my darkest shade of teal with my largest tool in the Crystal Light set, and I'm offsetting this row, and I'm flattening these dots for a top dot. Now I'm adding some of the titanium white to that same paint just to lighten the shade. And I'm doing 2 wells of it because I know I'm going to need a lot of paint for that final row. And I made a mistake. I dragged my hand across my dots there, so I had to go back with wet Q-tips and get that wiped up before it dried. So I reapplied those, and then I went back and did my lighter shade of turquoise for this final row of blue. Offsetting that row and getting it in between there. I love this part of it because you don't really have to think. You just are putting your dots right in the space there that's provided. And then again, I'm going to be putting the sort of iridescent cream dot in between those. And then for an edge treatment on my mandala, I decided to give it kind of a lacy look on the edge by using my medium brown, doing a single row of walking the dots, and then just one little final dot there on the edge. And did that all the way around to give it kind of a fringed edge around the mandala. Now while that dries, I decided to cut out some feather shapes. I made 4 large ones and 4 small ones, and I'm just adjusting them on here, thinking how I want them to lay out, and then I traced around them with the charcoal white pencil. And I'm going to draw their strings onto them hanging down from the mandala. I'm going to be using 4 colors here, the white, the cream, the red, and the turquoise. And first I'll be not really walking the dots. I want these to be all the same size, and then I'm just placing colored beads in there randomly all the way down, and then I'm going to start working on the feathers. I started with a large dot and then 2 smaller ones on either side. And then I started to walk those down on either side of the feather to a fine point at the end. And there's lots of different ways to do feathers on this design. I just decided on a more abstract, clean lines. So it sort of reminds you of a feather. Now while those are drying, let's do some top dots. This is really fun. I decided to do a row of turquoise on top of the red, right around the center of the mandala, and then I put iridescent gold on the white ring. And I'm using a very bright shade of turquoise here, mixing 2 paints together and putting the dark top dot on that blue petal. Now more iridescent gold on the second ring. And then some red top dots on the white feathery petals. And I added a lighter shade of blue on that bright turquoise ring. Now I'm adding some coffee bean top dots on the center. The top dots are really starting to make this painting come alive. Gives it texture, just makes it much more rich and deep. I decided to add some red on the outer rings, and then I did a row of turquoise on top of the brown on the outer ring. Make it look a little bit more like beadwork. And then a lighter shade of turquoise on the dark, and then I'm going to do a mother of pearl on the light blue, just to make sure the outer edge of the ring really glows. Then I did a mother of pearl walking the dots down the center of each feather. I left some of them straight and I bent a couple of the other ones, just because some feathers are very straight and some have a little bit of a curve to them. And then I went back with a damp Q-tip to remove all the lines. And finally here on these beads, I'm just adding a little dot of mother of pearl to make it look more like a bead that's shining. So I'm taking off all the guidelines now with my Q-tip. And then I will be spraying it with this, whoops, that's upside down, with the Kamar varnish. And this is my workstation where I painted this. It was so much fun doing this again. I love this design. Beautiful Southwest colors. This painting will be available in my online store. Thanks for watching, everybody.